So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the WARIF International Women's Day 2023 webinar. We're going to focus on technology as a tool to advance gender equality. And I'm super excited to be surrounded with amazing women who I've known for a really long time, each of them, and who all do really amazing work and have all sort of leveraged technology to achieve their goals. And I think, you know, I will just quickly introduce them and then we can get started immediately. So with us today is Dr. Kemi Da Silva Ibru. She's the founder of WARIF, Women at Risk International Foundation. Welcome, Kemi. Thank you for being here today. Then we've got Ore Leshi, who is the founder and executive director of Women's Technology Empowerment Center, WTech. Ore and I have known each other for probably 15 years. We both started out the same year. And we've been in each other's journeys since then and have supported each other. We sit on two boards together, so it's really a pleasure and honor to have you here. And then we also have Fade Ogunro, who is the founder and chief executive officer of Bookings Africa. A fun fact, Fade and I met on Twitter. So she used technology to reach out and say hi and say, hey, let's have dinner together. And yeah, the rest is sort of history, and we've been friends ever since. So I'm super excited to talk about a topic that is very close to my heart. And I think we can all agree that we really have seen the, I guess, evolution of technology over time. And we've seen how technology is now sort of the driver of socioeconomic development across the globe. And Nigeria and Africa are not left out, and women are not left out as well. And I think that technology really is a fantastic tool to drive gender equality and gender equity as well. And you know, I'll get started with one question that I want everyone to answer in one sentence. And the question is, right, how do you use technology to drive gender? And I prefer equity than equality, because I think that there's, you know, more, I guess, power in that. And it creates more of a leveled playing field by sort of making sure that you give opportunities that create, you know, sort of that leveled playing field. So we'll start with Ore and see, you know, what she thinks in one sentence, please.
Okay, that's difficult. So how am I using technology to promote gender equity? I think, okay, let me try and just be quick. I'm making it fun. I'm making it fun so that girls and other women are interested in engaging with it.
Okay. Kemi, how are you doing that?
Well, I think I am hoping to utilize technology and innovation to frog leap us in the gender space, specifically with disenfranchised women and girls, and allowing them the same opportunities as any young girl or woman in any high-income country.
Okay, Fade?
Well, I'm very passionate about the economic empowerment of women. So I always try to put technology first with regards to reducing the gender disparity when it comes to pay. And which is, of course, you know, Bookings Africa, that's one of the missions that we have, was to make sure that everybody's pay and everybody's fee was transparent, and they feel like they are actually sustainable, and they've got access to equal pay and opportunities. So that's one way that I definitely always focus when I'm using technology.
Okay, fantastic. I totally love that. I think there's so many ways to, you know, sort of close that gender gap that we see. And I think one big one, like Fade mentioned, is to create opportunities for women to earn equal pay, or even just be paid for the things that they do. I think also, in terms of what Kemi mentioned, it's really important to sort of use technology to protect women and also to give women a voice. And like Ora mentioned, it always has to be fun, because we all like to have fun. And, Ora, you do a lot of work at WTech that is focused on really getting young girls, primary and secondary school age, into technology. I've supported many of your programs from sort of inception till date by coming to speak to these girls. And, one of the, I guess, best parts of, being able to share is the effect that has, right? And I've had more than one of your girls come up to me at some big tech conference many years later to tell me, thank you. And Cam, you came to my school, you came to WTech's program, and I went on to become a developer because of that talk that you gave, right? And I think that work that you're doing is so important. And you're really sort of, using technology to get more women into that space, right? And showing them what technology can do. What do you think are the long-term benefits of the work that you're doing in sort of promoting that, women into the space? And is it going fast enough? Do you think, we still have a long way to go? I know a lot has changed since we started, but, where would you say we are?
Yes, I mean, the gap is still really wide. But it's better than it used to be, because when we started and we would talk about the gender gap in tech, people would be like, what gap? What gap? And then when, you start to explain, you share some of the figures, mostly figures from other countries, because gender disaggregated information about access to tech wasn't really available then. We had to go by like small sample studies, anecdotal information. And people would say, well, if women are not in tech, maybe it's because they don't want to, and it's not important anyway. But I think now there's a lot more awareness about the gender gap, the impact of the gender gap, and why it's important to get more women in tech, because tech it's solving problems. It's creating solutions for the world's problems, and the world is made up of men and women. I don't think that things are changing fast enough. Because every day I still engage with people who are either unaware of the gender gap. Just last week, I was talking on another panel, and yes, someone said that I don't think that that's a problem here in Nigeria. I think that we have, equity in terms of like pay and access to tech. I think this is like a foreign thing. And so people still have those perceptions. Girls still have the perceptions that tech is difficult, tech is for guys. So I think that we still have a lot of work to do. It is great when, we meet our alumni and we have an alumni network and everyone is sharing what they're doing. We have lots of girls in tech and we have girls who are not in tech, but they're using tech in what they're doing, which I think is also very important. You may not want to go to tech, but at least you are a confident user and you know how to use it for your own personal goals. I think that's important, but there's still a long, long way to go, I feel. You're muted.
Sorry. I think that's really important, just talking about not everyone needs to go into tech, right? With the work that you do, but just to create that awareness around how do I use technology to become a creator, for example. And that plays a really big role in the work that Fade does, right? So I want to know, Fade, what opportunities are you creating, and what opportunities do you think companies in general can create for women, using technology across both, education opportunities, but also wealth creation opportunities for themselves? So that's the first part. And then the second part of the question is, do you sort of like as a company, I guess, prioritize, or are you intentional about sort of hiring women for those technology roles that you have within your organization? And, what does that, sort of look like? And is there enough female talent to even say, I want to, sort of hire like that? Yeah, please.
Thanks. I'll take it. The first question, what can companies do in general? One, I think because of I guess when COVID happened, a lot of companies didn't have a choice but to turn to technology to actually continue to stay afloat. So remote work, technology really heavily enabled remote work. And in a way that allowed women a greater flexibility of work-life balance. So that in a way, I think some companies were able to become a lot more inclusive. And even after COVID happened and we were able to flatten the curve, a lot of companies are still offering hybrid or remote work as an option. So that's one thing. I think there's a lot of technology available for collaborative tools. So even if you are working remotely, it's easier for your team to collaborate, which can promote, I guess, greater diversity and inclusivity of thought and ideas. Technology, I always leverage technology for training and development. You've got so many courses out there, and even if you can't pay for a course, as long as you can pay for data, even YouTube, if you use it correctly, you can access a lot of developmental opportunities for employees, so that, especially women, so they can develop their skills and the knowledge that's necessary for them to advance in their careers. And performance evaluation. I always like to use technology to evaluate employee performance. So this helps to reduce bias. Also mentoring and networking. A lot of companies also can use technology and leverage technology in order to do so. Me personally, I am definitely biased towards hiring women. Out of, let's say, 30 staff, at least 80 to 85%, if not more, are women. There's a role, the product manager, the last product manager that I had, she started in operations and she showed a keen interest in becoming a product manager and learning a lot more about tech. And even my customer success manager, because part of the evaluation that we have is what goals do you have for yourself in the next 3 months, in the next 3 years, and nothing's ever static. So I give my team the opportunity, if they are interested in learning more tech-based roles, we give them and support them in that training to transition them into this role. However, as an employer, what I have found is there aren't that many women that apply for the technology, the deep technology-based roles. So if I'm looking at a development, but maybe like product managers and UI, UX, I find that there's a lot more options for women. But if I'm looking at front end, back end, stack, at all of that, then it's a lot more heavily based. There's a lot more options or a lot more men that apply for those roles. So I still see that there is quite a lot of gender bias and inequality in that regard. However, I try to do my bit as much as I can to support women in the advancement of technology and in their career.
Fantastic. I love that, you're also able to get women to sort of transition from operations into, a tech role, just because they have an interest in it. And I think that's also, I think a really big lesson for any woman out there that's listening, the fact that you can learn these things at any stage, right? And that you can use technology to actually enhance your career and, sort of, I guess, get further forward and also enhance your earning power by learning these new skills. Kemi, so you work in, the space of sexual gender-based violence, and, technology is a tool that you use for survivors to actually reach out to you. And do you sort of see culture and sort of, I guess, societal structures playing a role in women having access to technology and actually being able or wanting to use technology to reach out and to talk about what's happening to them? And do we need to do more in terms of getting women access or even creating awareness for these digital channels that they can use to, connect and to build a network and to get support? What do we need to do in that space in order for, the work that you're doing to actually be able to have more impact using technology?
Well, thank you, Nkem, for that really pertinent question. I think the first thing to highlight is what you've just said. Are there enough women taking advantage of technology in today's society? I mean, we work in Nigeria, and so the numbers that we deal with is sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, 18% of women in sub-Saharan Africa today are less likely than men to own a smartphone, for instance, or have access to the internet. I was reading somewhere that 259 million more men than women have been online over the last year. And so certainly when you have a 37% gender gap when it comes to the utilization of technology, you can already see how this is a disadvantage to women. And yet we know the clear advantages that technology and innovation plays. And as you rightly said, in today's world, with this digital gap or divide, how is she able to access, for instance, the care and the help that she so readily needs? We have multiple of platforms these days that have wonderful apps that take advantage of women that are in areas that are considered unsafe, students in universities. But again, for her to be able to access all of these platforms, she needs to have an available smart tool or at least some sort of technological device. We talk about organizations like ours and the fact that we offer, for instance, toll-free numbers for women that can reach us either because they're geographically too far away to get to the WARIF Rape Crisis Center, or sometimes they're just in other parts of the world and wish for the anonymity of not coming in. But if with a toll-free number, we have to pass on the cost to the organization in spite of it being toll-free for the survivor. So it would be wonderful, for instance, if we had telcos recognizing the important need to have these phone numbers available to survivors. I look at the lens of rural versus urban settings. The examples that we've given apply to both, but even more so in the rural areas. I mean, these are women that don't have access to basic infrastructure. And so we're struggling to, again, address that divide and allow for others to, I guess, appreciate the points that we make when we clearly highlight the challenges that these women have. So, I think another example that comes to my mind is social media. During the COVID pandemic, for instance, it allowed women to, seek help during the rising domestic violence because of the mandatory lockdowns. If we didn't have access to social media, many of our survivors couldn't direct message us, for instance, or raise an alarm when situations occurred in their environments. So highlighting issues, creating awareness, and also acting as a connector. I found that technology acts as a wonderful connector between women and women movements and organizations like ours, certainly in Nigeria and between our country and others.
Thank you very much. So both you and Fade sort of talked about the impact of the COVID pandemic. And I think that's, one sort of subject where the whole world sort of says, well, that accelerated technology. But then on the other hand, it sort of also widened the gender gap within technology. So, Ora, I want to ask you, what is the impact of the gender gap widening, right, on a global level, and also on a country or continent and country level, right? What do we really need to sort of look out for when we think about the impact of, and the learnings maybe out of the COVID pandemic, and what can we do better as well?
Thank you so much, Nkem. So I can start from our experiences on our own programs during COVID. So of course, like everyone else, we went online, and I think that one thing that COVID did for us that was that it made us realize that even though we were teaching tech, we were teaching about tech, we were not necessarily using tech in the most effective way. And maybe that's also partly because of the demographic that we address. So largely girls in secondary school, and then women, business women, but a lot of business women who own like micro to small size enterprises. So maybe with access to less income. So the very first program that we tried to move online was our after school club called our WTech Academy. And I mean, that totally didn't work because very few of the girls had access to a device that they could connect to the internet with. Very few of them had internet access. Where they did, it was usually owned by parents, almost always owned by parents. So we found that number one, that already was one obstacle to us being able to deliver our classes effectively. So we had to kind of work around that. And we realized that, okay, it's difficult to do a live class because everyone has access to the device at different times, usually maybe at night or some very awkward time. And then there was a lack of data. So they may be given the phone, but then there's no data to actually connect to the internet. So initially we started off with Zoom classes. Zoom didn't work at all. So we ended up using WhatsApp. We ended up recording the tutorials and putting together the PDFs and sending it to them via WhatsApp for them to access, you know, at their convenience, and then responding to us. So all that goes to say is that, yes, it was great that, you know, COVID accelerated the move online, but definitely there were so many people who were left behind, primarily a lot of girls and women, because, you know, they tend to have less access, you know, to the technology. So I think we really need to think about moving forward in terms of whether it's service delivery, for education or health. We need to really think about the people we're targeting. And I think that should be standard, like good business practice, you know your customer, know where they are, know what they have in terms of tech, and try to design for that. So for us, it was basically resorting to WhatsApp and seeing how we could use WhatsApp better. And this may vary from, you know, sector to sector, industry to industry, but it means that we also really need to look at low tech options as well. Now that COVID is still around, but I mean, largely, I think everyone has kind of moved on, you know, in their minds. We need to really think about, in case then maybe there's another pandemic, or we are thinking of better ways to use technology to deliver services. Let's also incorporate very low tech options, and let's see how we can combine that with face-to-face as well. So another thing that we looked at was kind of like circles or cells, where somebody in a community has a device, and then other girls in that community can come and share the same device. So that's a combination of the online and the offline. So I think that we do need to be innovative, you know, in terms of that. From a national level, it also means that these devices need to be more readily available. I think it's very easy for us in the nonprofit world to say that, but, you know, from a business point of view, someone has to pay for that. So I think that those are good investments to make, like for corporate social responsibility, investing in devices, or investing in the development of more low-tech devices that would last longer, that work well, especially for our environments where we have very, very poor electricity. So I think really seeing what the needs are for each country, each community, and trying to see how to design for that.
Thank you so much. I love the sort of localized approach and also the emphasis on the low tech, right? I always say that on the continent, we just innovate differently. And the truth is that we innovate to solve our own problems and not to solve anyone else's problems. And our solutions work for our problems. And sometimes that is just very, very low tech, but it is still innovation. I don't think that you have to have, you know, AI integrated or anything like that. I mean, all of that is great, but I think it's important to really know and localize your approach. So Fadi, I want to ask you also in terms of this, sort of localized approach and, sort of talking to that corporate social responsibility that Ore, sort of hinted at. What do you think is the role of corporates as well as technology companies when it comes to advancing gender equality, and what are the responsibilities they have? What are the things that they can easily, what are the sort of, I guess, the quick wins that will make, so it's like low effort, high impact type of things that they can do to really push the needle and move that?
Great question. There's a couple of things that I've actually toyed in with my head, and I've looked at lots of data and other case studies that people have done that have been impactful. I remember the Cherie Blair Foundation, they did a case study on the northern parts of Nigeria. I think it was Kano and a few other states, where they actually put together a course just for women by women on STEM. And what they found was that what they had to do was they actually had to go to the fathers and to the imams and to the heads of those society and encourage them and teach those men what the importance of women and the young women in their society taking part in STEM courses. And of course, the fact that it was free, and even the bus driver was going to be a woman, and the person that was teaching them was going to be a woman. So the heads of that society felt a lot more comfortable. And within a few months of I guess completing that course, some of these young women were able to then sign up to whether it's Fiverr or a few other job tech platforms and actually start to make an income in Forex and actually then support their families. And now those the male heads of society are now training or enforcing and encouraging other young women to partake in such courses. So those are the kind of localized innovations that we need to come up with. And it's not necessarily tech-led. It's looking at the society, looking at the nuances as to what the hindrance and barrier could be, and then saying, we're going to come up with the course and the strategy to actually tackle this. So that's one. And in terms of if we do want to leverage technology, if I could click my fingers and wish upon a tree, then I think telcos especially could provide free data. I think, first of all, that is something that would really change the game. That would really increase accessibility. Free data, because it's one thing to have the device, but a lot of people that do have the devices, they're underutilizing it. I have a lot of freelancers on my platform that you can't book them. But even though they've signed up to Bookings Africa, you can't book them because their data's off. I get data maybe when they go to a certain area where they know they can log in, or at a certain time of the day. So if telcos could actually provide free data, I think that would drastically increase accessibility. And a lot of the foundations, if they could come up with some low-tech sustainable devices that we could give to women or young girls in schools that we know are generally marginalized, this should also encourage their participation in technology. But I think education is actually key. There's a lot of gender bias that actually stems from the genesis of the positioning of STEM or the positioning of technology being heavily male dominated. So I think there's an education that needs to change in that mindset of various communities and various groups, that this is actually more inclusive, and in the long run, it's going to benefit the household and benefit the economy.
I love that. Some really, really practical examples of, what organizations and not just tech companies. I love what you said about, we need to be innovative, and it doesn't necessarily need to be tech driven or tech led. And I think that's really powerful, because I think a lot of the problems that we face are problems around barriers to entry, whether those barriers are on the data and device side, or electricity even, or whether those barriers are on the actual side of how our society functions and the role of the woman within the society. And And I also love the part about, sort of like changing the narrative. And I think that's why we're all here, to show that there are women in technology that have been able to create a path for themselves, that have been able to, build organizations that are making impact and that are successful and that are also using their voices to advocate for, policies that are focused on, getting more women into technology, and also, talking to the right type of stakeholders. So I think it's really, really important that, sort of narrative and storytelling aspect. And so with that, I want to go to Kemi quickly and, just ask, like, how are you using technology to, sort of engage with the different stakeholders that you have within your organization? How do you communicate the impact that you've made, as well as the problem, right? I think when it comes to, the space that you work in, sexual, gender-based violence space, a lot of people are not aware of the numbers, right? Not aware of how these numbers are really actually very, very scary. And I feel like technology is a great way of getting those numbers out there. So if you can just, share with us a little bit of what have you tried, what is working, how have you leveraged technology along also your value chain so far? Yeah.
Well, let me start with the numbers. I think that's a good place to start. Like you said, the numbers are staggering. When you're living in a country of 200 million people, and anyone that's heard me talk will probably have heard this from me, half of us are women, 49% of us are women. That's 100 million women. We all recognize we're a young country, so over 60% of us are under the age of 24. So when I say a statistic of 1 in 4 girls before the age of 18, that's over 10,000 girls every day. Now, these statistics are based on data from a 2015 study. So we can only assume that at best they're conservative. Now, when we move into the OGBV, everything has an acronym now, the online gender-based violence, we have no data because this is another evolving space. We recognize that it's something that needs to be tackled. But to go back to your question, I'm going to piggyback on Ore and Fade about the advantages of low tech as well as high tech. The low tech, we have found, especially working in rural communities, to be of huge benefit. 54% of Nigeria is in the rural communities. And so when we go into these environments, these are women that have no access, as Fade rightly said, to any internet. They have no understanding of what the internet is. And so we're not even about to have a conversation about what a smartphone looks like, because at best, most of them have an analog phone. So what we were able to do is we went into these communities, we introduced and implemented many of our programs, working with stakeholders. For example, the traditional birth attendant, who's the primary health provider, albeit she's informally trained. And majority of them have access to an analog phone. Sadly, many of them have to ask the permission of their husbands to use the phone, but at least the phone's available. So we recognize that for us to be able to communicate with them on a regular basis, we had to leverage off what they had, the existing phone that they had. So they could send a text message. They had access to SMS. The challenge we had was if we were sending information to them, how do we send a broadcast message to Ore, for instance, recognizing that this is sensitive information that everybody else may have access to? And that was our challenge. So we were very fortunate that we had at that time a partnership with the SAP group, and they were able to recognize the challenges that we had in these rural communities. A lot of their platforms very easily were based on tech and based on the internet use and access, but we had to explain to them that these are women that don't have and cannot utilize the internet. So they were able to create a platform where we could personalize our SMS messages specifically to each woman on the platform, and she could respond and we would receive it immediately. So based on that, we were able to go and offer very basic training. Do you, don't you, type in yes, type in no, tell us daily what the numbers look like, let us know when there's an active case so we can galvanize our resources and reach you. And we had up to 600 traditional birth attendants at some point or the other on this platform. And in the very first year, we had 200 cases from rural communities that would never ordinarily have had access to us. That's a classic example of the advantages of the low tech. High tech, we work with UN Women, with university students on campus sexual violence. Again, this was during the COVID, height of the COVID, I should say, 2020. So many of our universities were closed and we had no access to the students. But many of our students, as we know, as young people do, live on the internet. So we decided to create a learning management system and offer an online classroom and see whether or not, students would be open to signing up and participating. And in the very first year, we had 3,000 students. We repeated the program again in the second year. We were up to 6,000 and 7,000 from 106 universities. So again, we could see the clear advantage of utilizing technology and the reach as a result of it. So with WARIF, we're able to clearly see the clear advantages of whether it's low or high tech, and that's just with our educational and community service programs. When we go back into the healthcare services that we provide, as I highlighted earlier, we utilize the 0800 numbers. I firmly agree with Fade. I'm totally in your wheelhouse there about free internet, Wi-Fi, free telcos offering us the opportunity to run these 0800 numbers, because that's the challenge. Many women shy away from reporting cases of gender-based violence, yes, because of the patriarchy and because of the cultural practices that discourage them from doing so. But there's also that practical concern. She just can't afford the service. She can't make that call. She can't get to the facility, and when she gets there, she's certainly not going to pay for the services because she can't afford them. So this is where I can see, again, a clear advantage of leveraging off technology and offering better services to women.
Thank you so much. That number, 1 in 4 girls, is always like, I've heard it from you so many times, but it still, sort of sends chills down my spine, because it's really, really high. And I think, we and like you said, we don't even know the numbers of online gender-based violence. Okay, Fade has her hand up.
Yes, I'm a big fan of ChatGPT. So as Kemi was stating her point, I literally just put it in my phone right away. And I just said, can you share some statistics of OGBV in Nigeria and across Africa? And it's given me some interesting stats that I just thought I'd like to share before we move on to the next point. According to 2020, a report by the Digital Rights Foundation, Nigeria has one of the highest rates of online gender-based violence across Africa, with 33% of women experiencing some form of online harassment. And a survey by the Women of Uganda Women Network found that 75% of women in Uganda have experienced online violence, including cyberstalking, harassment, and blackmail. And in South Africa, a 2020 survey by Amnesty International found that 1 in 4 women have experienced online abuse or harassment, and 40% of women thought that the abuse was likely to escalate to physical violence. And a study conducted by the International Center for Investigative Reporting in Nigeria found that online harassment in Nigeria is often linked to offline violence, with many women experiencing physical violence after being targeted online. And lastly, in a survey conducted by the African Women Development Fund in 2020, 63% of respondents said that they had experienced some form of online gender-based violence, with cyberstalking and non-consensual sharing of intimate images being the most common types of harassment. I find it very enlightening to know that in Nigeria especially, there's a big link between online harassment and offline violence. So I just thought to quickly share that, courtesy of ChatGPT.
We love our ChatGPT assistant, and we're super excited that it's got upgraded today. So anyone who hasn't been on there, go check it out. Yeah, I mean, I think, these numbers, they are actually shocking, but then also not, because I think online is just a reflection of real life offline, right? And sometimes just a heightened reflection of that, because online, a lot of it is anonymous, a lot of it is, you can sort of do much more than what you would be able to do in the real world, because there's no one to say stop, right? You can just keep sending messages and keep, oppressing women. And I have a question for Ore on that. With the work that you do with young girls, how do you also protect them and make sure that they're safe, right? So you advocate for go use the technology, become a creator, and explore. But while you're exploring, you may be exposed to things that you, first of all, don't want to see, and then on the other hand, also exposed to online gender-based violence. How do you prepare young girls for that?
Thank you. Great question. Yes, it's horrible to hear those stats. It's really, really horrible. So we go to, at the end of each year, during the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, WTEC goes around to different schools and other institutions, tertiary institutions, and we speak to women about online violence, especially gender-based violence. And this is, in case we think that, oh, this is something that some girls or some women experience, virtually every girl, we start off our workshops, our sessions by asking the girls to raise their hand, if they've ever, had anyone send them intimate pictures unsolicited online, if they have been asked to, if they've been harassed, if they've been bullied. Virtually every hand goes up. Virtually every hand goes up, and it's shocking. Well, it should be shocking anyway, but it's yes. So almost every hand goes up. So it means that virtually every girl or woman has experienced some form of it, whether it's reported or not. So yes, we realize that it's a very, very huge responsibility. As much as we're saying, go online, these are the things that you can do, these are the opportunities you can access, it's also part of our responsibility to inform, girls and young women that these are the things that you could encounter, online. Of course, social media has an age limit of 13. So 13 and below, you are not supposed to be on social media, though we find a lot of young people below that age are on social media anyway. But so we don't encourage girls who are below 13 to be online. We don't incorporate that in our curriculum. We focus on the older teens. But with everything we do talk about the risks, the things that could happen. And we find that, a lot of parents are already reluctant to have their daughters, their wards go online because they are aware of these things that can happen. And so that's also part of the education that we need to do. Yes, these risks are there. There are these terrible things that happen. But the fact is that technology is here to stay. The internet is here to stay. It's bringing opportunities with it that we didn't have before. It's changing the way we live our lives, the way we access, whether it's health information, education, learning, professional development, doing business, getting paid. So really, no one has a choice but to be online. But you do have the ability to learn how to be online safely. And so those are strategies that, that we teach in schools. We incorporate it into most of our programs, but especially, at the end of the year, during the 16 days of activism, we have it's called a seminar series. We go around to different schools and different institutions. So when Kemi was speaking, I was like, I think that there are things that we could do in that regard, because you're already working in different schools across the country, and so are we. And we have a curriculum, and I think it could be so much richer if we're incorporating, the things that you are doing at WARIF. So I think that way we can reach more girls, more women, across the country. And if we can put it online, then across the world.
Love that. I was also going to say there's like so much partnership that needs to happen. And I think that's, you know, the beauty of a space like this, where you get to exchange and you get to sort of learn about what other people are doing, and how you can, you know, leverage what they're doing, how you can plug in, how you can partner to make those things bigger and better. And I think, you know, from the example of SAP, the SAP group, you know, sort of supporting the work of WARIF, it's also clear that there is a role that corporates can play in terms of their corporate social responsibility, in terms of, you know, their ESG focus and ESG drive. And I think it's really, really important that we create more platforms for opportunities to discuss these type of issues. But I think we also need to figure out what are the, you know, sort of, I guess, tangible solutions, and what role does policy play? So Faria, I would like to ask you, you know, how do you think these statistics that we've, you know, sort of just heard, both for sexual gender-based violence, as well as online gender-based violence, you know, Kemi put in the chat that women are 27 times more likely than men to experience online gender-based violence, 27 times. This is, you know, just really, really shocking. So what should governments be doing? And what should, you know, and even not just governments, but also the people who own, or corporates that own these platforms. So you think about Meta, for example, you think about Twitter. What should they be doing in terms of policies, you know, usage policies, ways of protecting women if there's such a big threat to women on their platforms?
That's a great question, and I hope it's not too little too late, but I'd like us to go back to the invention of social media and who were the actual creators and the developers behind the user experience. Majority of it were men. Now, if in the initial process of the brainstorming of the experience of social media, and if there were majority women, would we have likes? Would we have all these little features that actually can play a big impact on youth and their self-confidence? Because we know this, the relationship between the ratio between the rise of social media and the rise of suicide and depression amongst teenagers and youths, and especially young women. So we have to look back at the initial genesis. What caused the issue? And the issue was a lack of diversity, a lack of inclusion of women when it came to the decision process, so that we know that they can have more diversity and inclusion of women to then say, is this actually the best user experience for young women, for women as a whole? I offer a different, I too strongly believe that if women actually created Meta or Facebook or Twitter, and we actually were really strongly behind the user experience, I think the comments and the DMs and the features such as likes and the way the algorithms work are very biased still. There's one of my friends on social media, his name is Chaka Bars. He's an activist in Uganda, and he builds schools for young children. But he knows that every time he puts a post about the good work that he's doing, it gets hidden by the algorithm. So what he has to do, unfortunately, is put up a post with a half-naked woman, because he knows that's going to be clickbait. And then once you click on that, after a few seconds, he switches the video to say, well, actually, I didn't want you to know about this woman. I actually want you to know about these young kids. So he's actually tricking the algorithms. So these are the things that, now that we know the initial problem was lack of diversity in terms of the user experience, because there were no women that were involved with the development and of these programs, we now need to include a lot more women, break down each feature, look at what is the most harmful feature and how can we then actually mitigate against this. And for me right now, I do believe there's still a lot of, I guess, bias in the algorithms. So women who are flaunting themselves maybe in a way that's not necessarily educational or promotion or positive, That's subjective, I guess, but that tends to have a lot more views, and the algorithms tend to post that higher than if you were actually having this kind of discussion about gender equity and inequality. The algorithms will push this content lower. So I think there needs to be a balance and more and less bias within the algorithms in itself. And I think that's what the technology companies need to really heavily focus on.
Thank you so much. And I think that's such a good point in terms of, the user experience would have been completely different and probably more inclusive, probably also more protective if women had been involved in it. And I think that also, again, speaks to the need for more women to become product designers, product managers, to be part of teams that are creating customer experience, whether they're UI UX designers or, psychologists that are really thinking about, okay, how do we still remain profitable, but how do we create a safe environment for everyone? And I think that can probably only happen if government policies force organizations to do things in that way. And if they are the same way that we have in regulated industries, you have quotas for having women on board, and suddenly, organizations are able to produce competent women that can do the job and that can sit on boards, right? But when you then compare the regulated industries to non-regulated industries, you still have tons and tons of all-male boards, right? So I think, government policy must play some level of, some kind of role. Kemi, what is your take on this? And how do we as women also advocate for the right type of policies? What do we need to do to make sure that our voices are heard?
Right. So like Fade said, go back to the source, make sure there's that accountability, whether it's the conscious or unconscious bias, especially when, creating new technology. But presently, we also have to look at beyond the reporting channels that we have, in the larger ecosystem, what's available in Nigeria today, like for that average young girl or woman that's exposed, and men, I shouldn't, ignore the fact that, it happens to both gender, in spite of the fact that 27 times more likely a girl or a boy than a boy. What do we have available? We have different laws available in Nigeria that touch on OGBV, but we don't have a policy or a law that speaks directly to it. So for instance, in our criminal code, whether it's in the southern states or in the northern states, you would find, like language that speaks to the act of publishing sexual embarrassing images and for the purpose of extortion. And that in itself, is considered a crime. I know we have the Cybercrime Act. I believe it has more to do with national security, but it does have that legal and regulatory framework, and it's supposed to prohibit and prevent, again, the distribution of, online images, cyberbullying, cyber blackmailing, and revenge porn. And then we have our VAP Act, and VAP Act is very special to us in the gender space, because it's the amended law that we rely on, and we're hoping will be domesticated by all states soon. And this speaks again to all forms of rape and discrimination against women. And it's a small part of it that includes emails and text messaging. And so again, it's open to interpretation. Does it or does it not cover cyber stalking? But the language is leaning towards it. So what this tells us is that no, we don't have a cohesive, independent law. And certainly for us to achieve that, we need to go back to the policy stage. And we need to start looking at this growing problem that is not going away, because we're hoping technology is here to stay. We also, I think, need to go back to not so much the technology, but the existing mindset of the community. We can't ignore the fact that people are people, whether or not you're applying new technology or not. If you're living in a country that subjugates women, based on this patriarchy. If you're living in a country that the cultural practices encourage these acts of violence and the community shames and blames the survivor, regardless of the number of smartphones you give her, whether or not Wi-Fi is free, whether you create a mammoth of platforms for her to speak on, she would not be able to if the environment is not enabling. So I think it's important for us to also go back and recognize this root fundamental cause. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a really rich conversation. I think we've touched on a lot of very important aspects that, you know, create and also, I guess, perpetuate the gap when it comes to technology and gender. So I would like everyone to just give a few closing remarks, and if there are any questions from the audience, please put them into the Q&A. We've already answered some of those questions that were posted there, and are happy to take some more, but I'll just go around, starting with Aura, to just give, you know, a quick closing remark.
Thank you. Technology has so much potential. It's already changed, it's changed the world, it's changed the way in which we live. But there are so many people who are still marginalized: women, people in rural areas, people in the lower income brackets, even people with disabilities, you know, are less able to access, you know, a lot of tech. So I think, you know, this is just a call for, I think, for all of us, really, because we all have different roles to play. As a parent, you know, you have the responsibility to ensure that, you know, your children are able to access tech to the best that you can responsibly. For schools, it's important to make sure that, you know, teaching is done without bias, so that both girls and boys, you know, and young people with special needs feel equally supported. For companies, you know, that's making sure that they have a merit-based system of recruiting, which includes both men and women, you know, and people with disabilities. We all have a role to play. So I think it's important, you know, to see what we can do in our own individual capacity, and maybe as part of the groups that we are, to make sure that, you know, tech, you know, is fun, is engaging, and we're able to create, like, you know, make it welcoming for different types of people.
I love that, inclusivity in technology by playing your own part. Fade?
Absolutely, I completely agree with what Aura said. Overall, technology does have the potential to provide women with greater access to education, career opportunities, and it can help to promote gender equality and close the gender pay gap, which is very important to me. However, it is important to ensure that technology is used in a way that is inclusive and equitable, and that these barriers to access are addressed to ensure that all women have the opportunity to succeed. And with regards to the tech industry itself, I believe that technology companies have a responsibility to promote gender equality, not just within their own organization, but in the broader community. They need to take proactive steps to promote gender equality, and they need to provide more inclusive and equitable society. And just like what Aura said, we need to look internally within our own regions. What can we do differently to ensure that we're more inclusive and more equitable? And with regards to the government, I do believe there needs to be a deep dive into policies to see how all of these points that have been addressed can actually be supported through better policy making and more equitable society.
Thank you so much. I think we probably also need more women in policy to achieve that, but that's a conversation for another day. Kemi, your closing remarks.
I think it's clear from this conversation, and I know we all agree, that technology innovation is transformative. And the digital gap that exists today to access these opportunities is widest where women and girls are often most vulnerable and disadvantaged. And this speaks to whether it's gender-based violence in the real sense, or if it's online gender-based violence, which really is the same, except it's just perpetuated by using technology or a digital interface. So I think we need to, I cannot overemphasize, we need to fix those, institutions and those, that mindset that encourage these harmful gender stereotypes that, surround technology and innovation. Otherwise, we're failing girls and women. And I agree with both Ore and with Fade. We all have a role to play because we all have a collective responsibility in ensuring that whether it's the girl that's down the street or whether it's the girl that has finally access to a digital interface, that she must live in an environment that's free of gender-based violence. Thank you.
Amen to that. So we have one question in the chat, and it says, talking about technology, will there be need to censor sites in fighting this menace in our country? Kemi, do you maybe want to talk to that quickly? You're muted.
Sorry, censoring I think is a little strong. I think, as we all acknowledge, we need to make sure that technology is transparent and is accountable. I think in creating new technology, and I'll leave that to the experts on the platform, you need to ensure that all forms of bias, whether conscious or unconscious, is tackled. As earlier stated, we need to make sure that we have all the right firewalls in place. We need to make sure that all the right protocols are in place to ensure that everybody's experience online is in a safe and, and is carried out in an appropriate fashion. I think we also need to encourage proper training, if you will. I'm not sure if that's the right word, of appropriate etiquette and online behavior. I think there should be some safe space where women can go to and be assured that, she is in a secure environment where she can speak on her challenges and on these acts. I mean, we, for instance, have a WARIF anonymous platform. And we created that for just that idea, creating safe spaces. So censorship, perhaps not, but certainly making sure that it's appropriately supervised and monitored and making sure that it's transparent and accountable, I think is what we need to look at.
Yes, I totally agree. And I think censoring is just, sort of sweeping the root cause under the rug, to be honest. And I think what you mentioned earlier in terms of really addressing societal behavior as a whole, and not, sort of pointing fingers to, oh, it's because of technology. But it is really, just an amplified version of what we see in the real life. So we need to, sort of fix that. So there's one more question, and that will be our last question. What are ways we can ensure survivors in rural areas access technology as a means to get help in cases of sexual abuse or rape? So I'll give that to Kemi as well. You're muted again.
I apologize. Do you mind taking that question again? You asked what?
Now I'm muted. Basically, the question is,
you would think after 3 years of COVID, we have this down, but that's okay.
Yeah. So what are the ways we can ensure that survivors in rural areas access technology as a means to help in cases of sexual abuse and rape?
I think, we work with what we have. Any community, any environment should leverage off the safety protocols that they have available to them. If you go into the average rural environment today, unfortunately, no, she cannot access that amazing app that would then immediately get her assistance. But she can use the analog phone, like I said, and she can call an 0800 number and ask for assistance. I think we need to recognize that we're unfortunately not there yet, where we can offer the same access to technology across the board. And the rural communities will struggle because they're struggling with just basic infrastructure. We're looking at it through the lens of, do they have electricity, for instance? That's one of the basic tenets of, having Wi-Fi. And then we have, of course, the access to the devices that you need to be able to interface with this amazing technology. So I think what we need to do, Pamela, right now is to look around and look at all the amazing, innovative ways that we can still continue to protect her in the rural areas. We should leverage off the low tech that's already available, and then wait for the amazing Ore and Inkem and Fade to bring all the wonderful tech into these rural communities. And then we can offer them all the services that an urban setting would also have available to them.
Thank you so much. There's one more question that's come in. I'm going to answer that question by typing, but I just wanted to ask Fade and Ore if they have any additional comments to those questions that had come in, you know, while Kemi was answering.
I think Kemi did a great job touching the points about low tech, especially in rural areas. We cannot ignore the fact that it is a fundamentally infrastructural problem. So as much as we might like to leverage technology, we have to meet the problem where it is. And even if it means we need to leverage something as USSD, for example, maybe there's a shortcode that we can use via USSD. There's the toll-free number, and then even support systems. So there might be a community or a leader in the community that the person can have access to physically as well, if they need safety from a physical standpoint. So those are the low touch points and low tech points that yeah, I definitely agree with Kemi and all the points that she made.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's Kemi covered them really well. So yeah, sometimes there are places, you know, where tech is not the best option. And so you just need to go and educate, you know, the people in the community, particularly the gatekeepers. And yeah, and sometimes, yeah, you have to look at that collaboration between the offline and the online.
Awesome. Thank you so much, ladies. Thank you, Ore. Thank you, Fade. Thank you, Kemi. This has been a really rich conversation. Thank you for all the questions from the audience. And thank you for staying with us. My name is Nkemdulum Wajibel, and I would like to say goodbye and thank you.